She grabbed a stranger's arm and whispered, "Just act like you're mine for tonight," to make her ex jealous. But she picked the wrong man to use. When her billionaire ex tried to humiliate him with cash, the single dad didn't get angry. He walked to the stage, took the microphone, and said 3 words that made every socialite in the room gasp. What he did next proved that real class has nothing to do with money. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The hum of the black tie crowd was a symphony of polished lies. Crystal glasses clinked, a sound as sharp and fragile as the smiles being exchanged beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Oak Hotel ballroom. For Lucas Bennett, positioned near the ornate entrance, it was just noise. The real music was the quiet shuffle of feet on marble, the rustle of silk, the low thrum of the luxury car engines he'd just parked, a language of service he understood far better than the empty pleasantries floating in the perfumed air. He adjusted the cuff of his simple black uniform, his gaze sweeping the room with a calm, observational stillness. At 32, Lucas had a face that seemed carved from a different kind of stone than the smooth, cosseted ones around him, handsome in a way that spoke of early mornings and hard work, not personal trainers and tailored facials. His eyes, a steady, watchful hazel, missed nothing. He saw the way the elderly Mrs. Gable's hand trembled as she reached for her champagne, and he subtly guided a waiter her way. He noted the forced laughter of the young heir being groomed to take over his father's empire, the sound too loud, too brittle. His own world was a universe away from this. The thought of his daughter Sophie was a constant, warm anchor in his chest. He pictured her at home with Mrs. Higgins from next door, probably negotiating for an extra chapter of her dinosaur book, her small face set in a determined line. She'd drawn a T-Rex on his work schedule this morning, its goofy smile a stark and beautiful contrast to the severe, gilded scrollwork of the ballroom. Every car he parked, every door he held open, was for her, for the little house with the overgrown garden she loved, for the future he was determined to build her, brick by humble brick. Across the room, Isabella Rossi was a picture of curated success. In a floor-length emerald gown that complemented her hourglass figure and seemed to capture the very light of the room, she was the undisputed queen of this domain. Her smile was a masterclass in corporate diplomacy, bestowed on investors and socialites with perfect, measured grace. She moved through the throng, a beautiful, busty woman in her late 20s with an aura of command that parted the sea of guests effortlessly. "A stunning event, Isabella," gushed a portly man with a watch that cost more than Lucas's car. "Thank you, Robert. The Children's Hospital will benefit enormously," she replied, her voice a smooth, cultured alto. But beneath the polished exterior, a familiar tension coiled in her shoulders. Her CFO was hovering, a silent reminder of a quarterly report that hadn't met projections. A social columnist was circling, looking for a shred of gossip to exploit. This gala, her pet project, was as much a performance as any board meeting. Her world was one of transactions, of alliances built on stock prices and social capital. It was a beautiful, lonely fortress. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, scanned the room, assessing threats and opportunities. And then they landed on him, Julian Croft, her ex-fiancé, looking infuriatingly handsome and utterly pleased with himself as he entered the ballroom, a willowy blonde draped on his arm, a famous model no less. A cold fist of panic clenched in Isabella's stomach. The carefully constructed walls of her composure threatened to crack. All their history, his condescending dismissal of her sentimental charity work, the way he had made her feel small and overly emotional, it all came rushing back. He would see her alone, see this event as a pathetic attempt to prove something. He would win just by walking in.
Her gaze, desperate and searching, darted across the room, past the familiar, calculating faces, and landed on the one person who seemed utterly, authentically real, the valet by the door. Lucas Bennett. He wasn't posing, he was present. There was a quiet dignity in his posture, a grounded strength in his calm observation of the circus around him. In a room full of people pretending to be someone, he was unapologetically himself. It was a crazy, impulsive, brilliant idea. A plan, desperate and reckless, crystallized in her mind. Her eyes locked onto Lucas, a lifeline in a sea of sharks. Their worlds, separated by a chasm of wealth and status, were about to violently collide. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like everyone was wearing a mask but you? What's the first thing you do to stay grounded in who you are? Let me know in the comments. The sea of black ties and shimmering gowns seemed to part for her. Isabella Rossi moved with a singular, terrifying purpose, her emerald dress a streak of decisive color through the monochrome crowd. The polite mask of the host was gone, replaced by something raw and urgent. Every calculated step across the polished marble floor echoed in Lucas's heightened awareness. She was coming straight for him. His valet instincts warred with a sudden, primal alarm. Was there a problem with the vehicle? Had he misplaced a key fob? He straightened his posture automatically, his mind racing through a checklist of professional duties. But her eyes, wide, slightly wild, and fixed unwaveringly on his, told a different story. This wasn't about parking. Then she was there. The scent of her, jasmine and something darker like sandalwood, enveloped him, an expensive, intimate cloud that was utterly out of place in his work environment. Before he could form a word, her hand was on his arm. Her touch was not a request, it was a claim. Her fingers cool and smooth, curled around the rough fabric of his uniform sleeve, and she leaned into his personal space, her body a warm, startling line against his side. The noise of the Gala faded into a dull roar. All he could hear was the whisper of her breath against his ear, a secret meant for him alone. The words, however, were like a splash of cold water. Just act like you're mine for tonight. They hung in the air between them, loaded and impossible. Act. Mine. Tonight. Each word was a small explosion that dismantled his understanding of the situation. This wasn't a professional request. It was a performance. He was being cast in a role, a prop in a drama he didn't know the script for. For Lucas, time seemed to fracture. He stood frozen, his body rigid. The warmth of her touch felt less like an invitation, more like a brand. He was intensely aware of the dozens of eyes starting to drift their way, of the subtle shift in the room's energy. The invisible man had just been thrust into the spotlight, and the glare was humiliating. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along its line. He was a father, a provider, a man who fixed things with his hands. He was not a toy to be picked up and used for an evening's entertainment. For Isabella, the moment was a dizzying paradox. The plan was in motion. She could feel Julian's gaze burning into her back, and a savage, petty part of her thrilled at it. See, I am not alone. I am not pining for you. But the physical reality of the man beside her was sending unexpected shockwaves through her system. Up close, he was more solid than she'd realized. The strength in his arm beneath her hand was real, not gym-cultivated. The faint, clean scent of soap on his skin was a stark, unsettling contrast to the cloying colognes around them. The whisper, meant to be a command, had felt like a confession the moment it left her lips. A jolt, sharp and electric, had passed from his body to hers at the contact, complicating her purely tactical maneuver with a disorienting thread of genuine physical awareness. She had expected a nervous nod, a compliant smile from a hired hand. She had not expected this silent, solid resistance, this storm of dignity contained within his stillness. The bomb had landed, but it had detonated in a way she never could have predicted, shaking her own foundations as much as it had his.
The silence that followed her whisper was heavier than any Gala noise. Lucas felt the weight of every imagined stare, every suppressed whisper. Isabella's arm, still linked with his, was no longer a warm surprise but a shackle of fine bone and soft skin. He could feel the rapid bird-like flutter of her pulse against his wrist, a telltale sign of her own turmoil that did nothing to quell his own. "Miss Rossi," he began, his voice low, a gravelly attempt to reclaim some professional boundary. It was the voice he used to explain a tricky parallel park to a nervous guest, calm and measured. "Isabella," she corrected him instantly, her smile for the benefit of anyone watching, not reaching her eyes, which were locked on his with a desperate intensity. "Remember, we're old friends." The lie was smooth, practiced, but he could see the faint sheen of perspiration on her upper lip. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. Old friends. The words tasted like ash. He was a man who built his life on truth, the truth of a hard day's work, the truth of his love for his daughter. This fiction felt like a violation. He gently but firmly extricated his arm from hers under the pretense of adjusting his cuff, creating a crucial inch of space between them. The loss of contact was immediate relief, followed by an unwelcome chill. "Of course," he murmured, the words feeling foreign. He didn't look at her, instead focusing on a point somewhere over her shoulder, his posture ramrod straight. He was playing the part, but his body was a fortress under siege. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to return to the familiar, uncomplicated world of car keys and engine purrs. Isabella felt his withdrawal like a physical slap. This wasn't going according to plan. He was supposed to be grateful, or at least compliantly charming. Instead, he was a statue of quiet disapproval. She overcompensated, her laughter a touch too bright as she leaned in again, her hand coming to rest lightly on his forearm. "You're doing wonderfully," she whispered, the words meant to be encouraging, but landing as a patronizing directive. Lucas's jaw tightened further. He could feel the eyes on them now, curious, speculative. He saw Julian Croft from across the room, a smirk playing on his lips as he sipped his champagne. The humiliation, which had been a simmering heat, now boiled. He wasn't just a prop. He was a joke. A handsome valet playing dress-up with the CEO. "I need a drink," Isabella announced, her voice straining for a casual note. "Come, let's find some champagne." It was a command, not an invitation. Lucas didn't move. "I'm on duty, Miss Rossi," he said, the formality a shield. "I shouldn't." "Nonsense," she insisted, her grip on his arm tightening slightly. "For tonight, your only duty is to me." Her eyes pleaded with him, a silent scream for him to play along. It was that final phrase, "your only duty is to me," that sealed it. The class divide, which had been an abstract concept, suddenly had a voice and a beautiful, desperate face. He was her subject for the evening. He gave a curt, single nod, the motion costing him a piece of his pride. He allowed himself to be led, a silent, resistant captive in a gilded cage, the tension between them so thick that it was a wonder the chandeliers above them didn't tremble. Their awkward two-step through the ballroom was halted by the very person Isabella had sought to avoid. Julian Croft materialized in their path, his new model girlfriend hovering just behind him like a beautiful, silent shadow. "Isabella," Julian said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. His eyes, a cold, calculating blue, slid from Isabella to Lucas and back again, the smirk never leaving his face. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The pause before friend was a masterclass in insinuation. Isabella's spine straightened, her grip on Lucas's arm becoming vice-like. Lucas felt his muscles coil, not in aggression, but in defensive readiness. He was now center stage in a play he never auditioned for. "Isabella, darling, you're crushing the silk," Lucas murmured, his voice low and surprisingly steady. It wasn't the script she'd written. He gently patted the hand she had clamped on his forearm, a gesture that could be interpreted as intimate, but was in reality a subtle request for her to release the pressure. The use of her first name, darling, felt alien on his tongue, yet he infused it with a calm that seemed to ground her for a moment. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Julian, this is Lucas," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of her natural authority. "Lucas, this is Julian Croft, an old associate." "Lucas," Julian repeated, as if tasting the name and finding it bland. "I don't believe I've seen you in the financial district. New to the city?" The question was a carefully laid trap, designed to expose Lucas as an outsider. Before Lucas could form a reply, a server appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. In a move of pure, unthinking instinct, Lucas reached out, took 2 glasses, and handed one to Isabella. It was a simple, graceful act, one he'd performed 1,000 times for guests. But in this context, standing by her side as her date, it was transformed. It wasn't servitude, it was partnership. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice barely a whisper. The simple act, so out of place yet so natural, disarmed her completely. "I'm in transportation," Lucas said to Julian, meeting his gaze squarely. It wasn't a lie. It was a quiet reclamation of his own narrative. Julian's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected stammering, discomfort. He hadn't expected this calm, unshakable presence. "Transportation? How modern," he recovered, his tone dripping with disdain. "Well, we mustn't monopolize you. The silent auction beckons. Do try the canapés, Lucas. I'm sure they're a step up from your usual fare." With a final patronizing nod, Julian guided his date away, leaving a wake of toxic smugness. Isabella stood frozen, the campaign flute trembling in her hand. The confrontation was over, but the humiliation was fresh. Julian's barb about the canapés had been meant for her as much as for Lucas. She had brought this upon him. "Come on," Lucas said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with a new determination. He didn't wait for her to take his arm. Instead, he gently guided her by the elbow, not towards the center of the room, but to a relatively quiet alcove near the balcony doors. They were still in view, still performing, but he had carved out a small pocket of semi-privacy. They were trapped together, bound by the lie and the shared sting of Julian's contempt, but the dynamic had shifted. Lucas was no longer just a resistant prop. He had become an unexpected and surprisingly capable co-conspirator.
The alcove offered a sliver of respite from the Gala's overwhelming glare. The noise receded to a muted hum, and the cool night air from the balcony door nearby kissed Isabella's heated skin. She leaned against the wall, her composure in tatters. The champagne flute in her hand was a prop she no longer knew how to hold. "I'm sorry," she breathed out, the words directed at the floor. "About Julian, he's always been like that." Lucas stood beside her, not looking at her, but observing the room as if it were a landscape he was tasked with navigating. "People like him usually are," he replied, his voice neutral. There was no anger in it, just a simple, weary acceptance that felt more damning than any outburst. His calm was unnerving. She had expected him to be furious, to demand an explanation, to walk away. This quiet solidarity was something she didn't know how to process. The transaction was breaking down. He wasn't just an employee she'd hired for the night. He was a person she had willingly exposed to venom. Thank you, she said, finally looking at him. For what you said. Transportation. It was perfect. A ghost of smile touched his lips. It's the truth, just not the whole truth. He finally turned his gaze to her, and in the softer light of the alcove, she saw the fine lines of fatigue around his eyes, the weight he carried, without complaint. I spend my days driving other people's dreams so I can build one for my daughter. The confession was quiet, unprompted. It wasn't the plea for sympathy. It was just a statement of fact. But in this world of curated personas, it was a detonation of authenticity. Isabella felt something crack open inside her. "What's her name?" she asked, her voice softer than she'd used all night. "Sophie," he said, and the way his entire being seemed to soften around the name was its own kind of biography. It spoke of bedtime stories and packed lunches, of a love that was absolute and uncomplicated. "She's 5. Thinks dinosaurs are the pinnacle of evolutionary design and that I should wear more colorful socks." He didn't say he was a single dad. He didn't have to. The specificity of the detail, the intimate knowledge of a 5-year-old's worldview painted the picture more vividly than any sob story. Isabella looked down at her own hands, at the single, flawless diamond on her finger, a purchase she'd made for herself after the merger was finalized, a symbol of her own success, cold and solitary. "I used to collect rocks," she heard herself say, the memory surfacing from a place she'd long sealed off. Not gems, just ordinary rocks from the garden. I'd paint faces on them and give them names. My father said it was a waste of time. That Rossi woman didn't play in the dirt. She let out a short, hollow laugh. He had my nanny clear them all away while I was at school one day, said they were cluttering up the patio. The admission hung in the air, small and vulnerable. It was a story not about millions or mergers, but about a little girl whose small, strange treasures were deemed unworthy. It was the first true thing she had offered him, a piece of broken pottery from the foundation of her fortress. Lucas was silent for a long moment. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He nodded, as if she'd just confirmed a theory he'd held. "Sophie would have loved them," he said finally. "She has a pet rock named Steve. He has googly eyes." The simplicity of his response, the immediate connection to a world of pure, unvarnished feeling, was a balm she had not known she needed. In the space of a few minutes, they had not exchanged life stories, but they had traded fragments of their souls, a dinosaur drawing, a painted rock. The props were gone. All that was left were two people, standing in the quiet aftermath of a shared truth.
The silence that settled between them after their confessions wasn't the tense, loaded quiet from before. This was different, softer. It was the quiet of a shared secret, a fragile bridge built over the chasm that separated their lives. They stood in the alcove, no longer as CEO and valet, nor even as reluctant co-conspirators, but as two people who had just glimpsed the real person hiding behind the titles. Isabella found herself studying him, truly seeing him for the first time. She saw the way his calm eyes crinkled at the corners, not with laughter, but with a history of squinting against the sun or focusing on a complex engine. She saw the strength in his hands, one resting lightly on the balustrade of the alcove, hands that could gently hold a daughter's painted rock and confidently maneuver a $500,000 vehicle. "Googly eyes?" she asked, a genuine uncalculated smile finally reaching her own eyes. The tension had drained from her shoulders, leaving her feeling strangely light. "The wobbly kind," Lucas confirmed, a real, warm smile gracing his features for the first time that night. It transformed his face, carving out a kindness and humor that the stoic mask of his duty had hidden. "He's a good listener, too. His directness. Doesn't talk back. Sophie says that's his best quality." They shared a look, a moment of perfect, understanding humor that shut out the entire gala. For a few heartbeats, the glittering crowd became the performance, and their quiet alcove became the only real place in the world.
The forced proximity had melted away, replaced by a voluntary, easy closeness. The emerald silk of her dress brushed against the black wool of his sleeve, and this time the contact didn't feel like a claim or a shackle. It just felt natural. "This," she said, her voice losing its cultured edge and becoming almost wondering. "This is the most normal conversation I've had all week." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful as he looked at her. He wasn't seeing the CEO anymore. He was seeing the woman whose painted rocks had been taken away. "It's not so bad, just talking." "No," she whispered, her chest feeling tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "It's not bad at all." In that suspended moment, the hum of the gala became a distant orchestra playing a song for someone else's life. There was no pretense, no strategy, no class divide. There was just the warmth of a shared laugh, the comfort of a quiet space, and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being truly seen. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was something far more potent. It was a moment of peace, a glimpse of a world where she could be Isabella, and he could be Lucas. And for the first time in a very long time, healing didn't feel like a distant concept, but a tangible possibility resting in the quiet space between them.
A needle of condescending applause popped the bubble of peace. Julian Croft was standing a few feet away, slowly clapping his hands together, his date looking vaguely bored beside him. "Bravo!" Julian said, his voice cutting through the quiet intimacy of the alcove. "A truly touching performance. Isabella, I had no idea your taste for grassroots theater had evolved so dramatically." The spell shattered. Isabella flinched as if struck, the warmth in her eyes freezing into panic. She took a half step away from Lucas, the distance feeling like a mile. "Julian, this isn't the time or place," she said, her voice strained, the CEO mask slamming back into place with visible effort. She was retreating publicly. "Oh, I think it's the perfect place," Julian purred, stepping closer. His cold eyes swept over Lucas with dismissive amusement. "I was just telling Cassandra here about the remarkable efficiency of the staff at this venue. It seems they offer a full suite of services." He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a money clip, thick with bills. He peeled off a few $100 bills with a theatrical flourish. "For your exemplary service tonight, my man. You've certainly earned it." He held the money out towards Lucas, not as a tip, but as an indictment. It was a public declaration that Lucas was nothing but hired help, a paid escort for the evening, performing a service for a desperate woman. The air left Lucas's lungs. The humiliation was no longer a simmering heat. It was a glacial freeze that locked his joints. He looked from the money to Julian's smug face, then to Isabella. This was the moment for her to stand up, to say, "He's with me," to tell Julian to go to hell, to defend the man with whom she'd just shared a moment of profound, genuine connection. She said nothing. Her eyes were wide with mortified shame, fixed on Julian. She was trying to manage him, to de-escalate, to use the corporate calm she wielded in boardroom coups, but this wasn't a boardroom. This was a man's dignity being stripped bare, and her silence was her complicity. "Miss Rossi doesn't pay me to be insulted, and I don't take money from snakes." Julian's smirk widened, delighted by the reaction. "Is that so? Isabella, is your friend refusing his gratuity?" The pressure was too much. The fear of Julian's gossip, the terror of the social scandal, the weight of her own image, it all collapsed on her at once. "Lucas, just take it," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "It's easier." Those 3 words, "it's easier," landed with the force of a physical blow. They were the final betrayal. She had chosen the path of least resistance. She had chosen her world over the truth they had just discovered. Lucas looked at her, and the connection that had sparked between them moments before died in his eyes, replaced by a bleak, profound disappointment. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow. Without a word, he turned his back on both of them. He didn't take the money. He didn't look back. He walked away, leaving Isabella standing there, the offered cash hanging in the air like a monument to her cowardice, the shattered pieces of their bond glittering on the marble floor between them. What would you do if the person you were starting to trust failed to stand up for you in public? Could you ever forgive a moment of cowardice like that? Share your thoughts below.
The ballroom swelled with noise again, but for Isabella, it was a silent film. She stood frozen in the alcove, the ghost of Lucas's warmth still a searing brand on her side. Julian's mocking laughter faded as he moved away, his work done. The crisp bills he'd offered lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves, a testament to her failure. "It's easier." The words echoed in her skull, a pathetic, cowardly mantra. She had spoken them to avoid a scene, to maintain control, but in doing so, she had lost everything. The memory of Lucas's face, the way the light had vanished from his eyes, leaving behind a flat, hollow disappointment, was a pain sharper than any corporate betrayal. He hadn't been angry, he had been finished. And she had done that. She had taken the one real, unvarnished thing she'd encountered in years and handed it to Julian to be crushed. Her gaze swept the opulent room, the glittering jewels, the false smiles, the hollow clink of glasses. It was a gilded cage, and she had chosen the lock over her own chance at freedom. For what? To preserve a reputation in a world she secretly despised? To prove something to a man who wasn't worth the dirt on Lucas's shoes? Away from the crowd, near the service entrance, Lucas leaned against a cool wall. The din of the gala was a distant hum. The anger was there, a hot coal in his gut, but a crushing sense of foolishness dwarfed it. He had let his guard down. For a moment, he had forgotten the immutable lines that divided their worlds. He had seen vulnerability in her eyes and mistaken it for a bridge. He was a fool. He thought of Sophie, of her unwavering belief that her dad was a hero who could fix anything. What would she think if she saw him now? Not a hero, but a man used as a toy and then discarded when the game got messy. The shame was a physical weight. He had a choice. He could slip out the service entrance, go home, and never look back. He could return to his life, a life built on tangible, honest things. It was the safe choice, the smart choice, but it wasn't the right choice. Because walking away meant that Julian and everything he represented had won. It meant that a man's value truly was determined by his bank account. It meant that Isabella's cowardice was the final correct word on his character. He couldn't live with that. Not for himself, and not for the daughter who was watching him, even from miles away. Isabella's breath hitched. The choice was hers now. She could let him go. She could plaster on a smile, finish hosting the gala, and return to her sterile, powerful, lonely life. It would be easier. Or she could choose the harder path. The path of vulnerability. The path of truth. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, found the service entrance across the ballroom. He was there. She knew it. Every fiber of her being was pulling her in that direction. Lucas pushed himself off the wall. His jaw was set, his posture no longer that of a valet, but of a man who had reached a decision. He wasn't leaving. Not like this.
In the heart of the glittering gala, surrounded by hundreds, they were utterly alone, each standing at their own personal precipice. The next move would define them: pride or vulnerability, the safety of the cage or the terrifying risk of the open sky.
The air in the ballroom, once thick with perfume and pretense, now felt charged with a new electric tension. The band's music faltered as the lead singer, looking slightly confused, yielded the stage. All eyes followed Lucas Bennett's steady, deliberate walk to the microphone. He was no longer a man in a uniform trying to be invisible. He was a man completely, unapologetically present. Isabella stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was not the quiet retreat she had expected. This was something else entirely. Lucas tapped the microphone, the sound echoing in the sudden hush. He didn't look at Isabella. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze calm and direct. "My name is Lucas Bennett," he began, his voice clear and carrying, devoid of the gravelly softness he'd used with her. It was the voice of a man stating a fundamental truth. "And for most of you, I'm the man who parked your car tonight." A nervous titter rippled through the crowd. Julian Croft crossed his arms, a smirk of anticipation on his face, waiting for the humiliating spectacle. Lucas continued, unfazed. "We're here tonight for a children's hospital. A noble cause. We put on our finest clothes, we make generous bids in the silent auction, and we feel good about ourselves. And we should." He paused, letting his words hang. "But there's another kind of charity that doesn't get a black tie gala. The charity of seeing the person next to you. Not their net worth, not their job title, not the car they drive, but the person." His eyes finally found Isabella's across the room. The connection was a physical thing, a taut wire. She felt pinned, exposed, her breath catching in her throat. "A few minutes ago," Lucas said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, yet still projected for all to hear. "Someone offered me money. A lot of it. Not for parking a car, but for the service of being a human prop. For pretending to be someone I'm not. To make someone else feel more important." A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of anger. Isabella felt a hot wave of shame, but she couldn't look away from Lucas. "I didn't take the money," Lucas stated, simple and firm, "because my value isn't for sale. My value is in my hands that work hard. It's in my heart that I love my daughter more than anything in this world. It's in my word, which I keep. And tonight, my value was in being asked to be someone's for tonight." He paused. The silence in the ballroom absolute. "But here's the thing," he said, his voice now a low, powerful thrum that seemed to vibrate in Isabella's very bones. "I don't know how to act. I only know how to be. So Isabella Rossi." He said her full name, and it sounded like a benediction and a challenge all at once. "You asked me to act like I was yours for tonight. But I don't want to be yours for just tonight. And I won't pretend to be." The entire gala held its breath. Isabella felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over, tracing warm paths through her makeup. He wasn't shaming her. He was reclaiming them. He was offering the truth she had been too afraid to ask for. He was stunning them all, just as the title promised, but not with a grand romantic gesture, with a quiet, earth-shattering honesty. In that moment, the CEO, the powerful Isabella Rossi, made her choice. She didn't care about the staring eyes, the whispers, the scandal. She only cared about the man standing in the center of the room, offering her everything by refusing to give her anything less. She walked toward him. The crowd parted for her once more, but this time it felt different. She wasn't a queen moving through her subjects. She was a woman, walking toward her truth. She stopped in front of him, the scattered $100 bills lying forgotten on the floor between them. She looked up into his eyes, her own filled with tears, regret, and a dawning, terrifying hope. "Then don't act, Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear in the silence. "Just be." He didn't smile. He nodded, a deep, profound understanding passing between them. He offered her his arm, not as a valet, and not as a pretend date, but as an equal, as a man. She took it, her hand sliding into the crook of his elbow, the touch now a promise, not a pretense. And together, without a single backward glance at the stunned, silent Gala, they walked out of the ballroom and into the possibility of a tomorrow. What did you think of Lucas's stunning move? Was it the right way to handle public humiliation and find a real connection? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. Thank you for watching this story of Lucas Bennet to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So subscribe, and Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.